What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Well, yesterday, a ton of backlash hit Microsoft after they announced their generative AI model for game development, and there is a lot of concern, and I do understand, but I think there's also a lot we could take away from what looks to be more and more of a future for gaming. We'll go over that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about what looks like a pretty exciting remake that's slated this year. In fact, it seems like it's leaked out that there could be a shadow drop for it this summer. And we also have Shuhei Yoshida talking about Sony when they had to deal with Japan studios. And I say deal with because they shut them down. Well, now he at least gives us some sort of reasoning as to why. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps it a ton. And if new here to the SpawnWave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members for the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button down below. And we're going to start today with an update for Marvel Rivals. We know that there were layoffs that happened in the US, specifically in Seattle. It seemed to be a support studio. Well, now we have this posted up. This is over on PC Gamer, who got the response. This from NetEase saying, we recently made the difficult decision to adjust Marvel Rivals development team structure or for organizational reasons and to optimize development efficiency for the game. This resulted in a reduction of a design team based in Seattle that is part of a larger global design function in support of Marvel Rivals. We appreciate the hard work and dedication of those affected and will be treating them confidentially and respectfully with recognition for their individual contributions. They also go on to say that, hey, Marvel Rivals isn't going anywhere. In fact, we're actually investing more despite the layoffs here that happened in the US. They say it's more organizational, which their core dev team is in China. It's not in the US, so maybe in their mind, hey, that's like a satellite studio that we don't really need anymore, or it's just a time zone difference. Who knows? I mean, really, we already heard that NetEase was just kind of reevaluating their investments overseas, and this most likely was just one of them. So yeah, not the whole team behind Marvel Rivals is shut down, nothing like that. Again, smaller studio that helped to get the product to release, and them now apparently doubling down more and more on investments into the game going forward. Also, we did have previews go up yesterday for Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition. This course coming out in 1 month, actually in March. And this was a really good one, a good write-up here for the preview. This was over on RPG Site that really went over a lot of the differences between the Wii U release and the newer Switch Definitive Edition, improved visuals and cleaner user interface. I saw a few videos, I think like Nintendo Life did one, where they did a comparison between the Switch visuals and the Wii U visuals, and yes, the Switch does just look, as they say, cleaner in general. Although it's not going to be like a massive leap where it's a remake or something, but no, it will just look better in general. You can change your party at any time. You can change the time whenever you want. They point out like a quick cooldown bar that you have there along the bottom of the UI. New story content, new characters, there's no blade levels or division points. And this just looks like, I mean, look, so the biggest thing with Xenoblade Chronicles X, obviously, it's stuck on the Wii U, or was stuck on the Wii U. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing for this particular entry, is it's going to be thrown into the Wii U generation right at the end, when there's just a massive audience there ready to receive it. And I know we have Xenoblade Chronicles 3 that did really, really well for them, but now you can buy a Switch and have access to the entirety of the Xenoblade franchise, which is very, very impressive. And I think that's just good in general for Nintendo to have that entire franchise represented with Chronicles X rounding things out here next month. So I'm going to be picking it up and revisiting it. It has been a while since I had played it on the Wii U back in the day, so I'm pretty excited. Oh, and we did get an announcement that Mouthwashing is actually expanding outside of just PC. This we could see over on Gematsu, where they say the publisher Critical Reflex and developer Wrong Oregon will release the PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and Switch versions of Mouthwashing in 2025. And it gets better. There will be a physical edition that'll be available on the PlayStation 5 and Switch through Fangamer. And I think this is the time I'm gonna pick it up, I think physically, and play through the game. I've had so many people tell me in the comments and stuff, hey, you gotta play Mouthwashing. And I actually think it probably would have done fairly well during the Game of the Year madness if it had enough reviews then. This might get it over that threshold, but it technically came out last year, not this year. For later on in the year, we do it all over again. But nonetheless, I'm interested in checking it out. That first-person horror-style game and like PS1 graphics definitely will be a bit of a shakeup for most of the things you see on the market now. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with a remake that I think we are going to see this year, and it's pretty exciting because it's technically an update to a story we went over yesterday, where a pro skater mentioned that Tony Hawk, some kind of Tony Hawk game, a remaster, is coming out later this year. Well, now we have a bit more context and more sources around this, and I also decided to look around a little bit here, but it seems like it's kind of like just an open secret at this point, but this we can see posted up. This is over on Push Square. According to X's Ones, says Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 and 4, a remake of the third and fourth games in the series, will be revealed during Xbox's summer showcase in June. And that's not all. Apparently, it'll not only be announced, but it will be released on PS5 and other platforms after the presentation. So yes, a shadow drop. And it says other platforms. It coming out in June does complicate things a little bit because that could be right around the time that the Switch 2 comes out, or even weeks after. Let's say the Switch 2 comes out at the end of May. I think that's going to follow a similar trajectory that we had with 3 and 4, where that came out like well after the original 1 and 2 released on Xbox and the PlayStation and PC. So that's kind of what I think is going to happen here. But nonetheless, yes, 3 and 4, a remake, the go figure, of Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 and then Tony Hawk Pro Skater 4 from the PS2, Xbox, GameCube generation will be most likely releasing this summer. I say most likely because you never know. We've seen Microsoft push things because, we have too many games. And technically, I will give them this. Their release lineup for 2025 is looking kind of ridiculous at this point, with a recent developer direct that kind of ends, or their current release short-term roadmap ends with Doom in May. And then you start things back up in June with we assume their E3, not E3, showcase. This would be a really, really cool shadow drop, and I think it makes sense. It's a known franchise. Yes, they're technically remakes, but if you played 1 and 2, they took elements from 3 and 4 and moved them in, like the revert, for example, into manual out of a vertical ramp, and that does change the game quite a bit. And they even mentioned that, hey, the next thing up was going to be 3 and 4, but we actually had to help out with Call of Duty. And of course, that then just snowballed to them being absorbed into Blizzard with Albany and stuff. And now it does seem like they're poised to make a return to Tony Hawk Pro Skater with 3 and 4 coming this summer. So that's pretty exciting. Even over on Reset Era, again, I said it's kind of like this open secret, and it sort of feels that way because, like, you can see this over there. This was from, so Zeta Slow says it exists and it's 3 and 4. A friend of mine pitched for the ad and didn't get it. And that is kind of funny because I'll talk about this with a comment later on as I picked it out, but the gaming industry is incredibly secret around these announcements to the point where most people outside of gaming don't really understand, and they'll just say stuff in like interviews, as we're seeing with The Breakfast Club being the latest example. But yes, exciting stuff for Tony Hawk Pro Skater fans. Hasn't been announced yet, but I guess look towards the summer, that June showcase where they'll announce it and most likely drop it immediately into Game Pass, and then also on PlayStation 5, PC, and I think a Switch 2 port coming later on. Next up, let's talk about Microsoft and their generative AI model that they dub MUSE. Well, this did a number online, as in people were not happy to see this at all, and I think when you bring up generative AI in an extremely a creative and competitive space like gaming, you're going to get this kind of reaction. But when you sort of go past the headline and kind of look into what they're saying here, it's not necessarily as bad as it first looked, but I have a lot of questions around this one. Let's take a look, though. This over on Xbox's website with the press release saying, in partnership with Xbox Game Studios, Ninja Theory, Microsoft Research developed a world and human action model, which WHAM is named MUSE, a first-of-its-kind generative AI model trained on Ninja Theory's multiplayer battle arena game, Bleeding Edge. So with Bleeding Edge, you could opt into having your game like recorded, the whole thing, and it seems like they use that in turn to train this AI model, or WHAM. What's groundbreaking about MUSE is its detailed understanding of the 3D game world, including game physics and how the game reacts to players' controller actions. This allows the model to create consistent and diverse gameplay rendered by AI, demonstrating a major step toward generative AI models that can empower game creators. Here's the interesting thing about this, because look, you see generative AI and you're like, hold on a minute. Is that like generative AI for content, as in you can have an AI model just create a game outright, art assets that may or may not have been found and taken a lot of inspiration from ones that already exist online, down to, as they mentioned, the gameplay, the worlds, the user inputs, that whole thing. Well, yeah, technically, I think you could probably do that eventually, but there are some interesting use cases for something like this. For example, this also part of that report where they say today countless classic games tied to aging hardware are no longer playable by most people. Thanks to this breakthrough, we are exploring the potential for MUSE to take older back catalog games from our studios and optimize them for any device. We believe this could radically change how we preserve and experience classic games in the future and make them accessible to more players. So the idea being, hey, if we have a well-trained AI model like MUSE, could we have it look at older games and sort of work to craft and mold that and work on a console that is like 3 or 4 generations later? Because we do have the backwards compatible setup from Microsoft, and they've been kind of in and out of that. Most of that team is now working on next generation stuff, which is probably just, hey, let's just try to get everything backwards compatible that we can. And with how they had a pace with the Xbox 360 and the Xbox One and the Xbox Series that wasn't, hey, we're eventually going to get everything backwards compatible. It just wasn't going to happen. But with AI model like this, maybe there's so many what ifs here. So the idea of AI helping to maybe craft and mold these different games that are current gen to then work on a bunch of different devices that Microsoft themselves didn't necessarily create. That's another potential thing. So if Asus is making something, if MSI is, as we've talked about for next gen, and then you have AI that can come in and try to set all of this up with the system settings and things in the background for it to work on the fly, that would be pretty impressive. But it also sounds like an incredible undertaking that is, I'd have to see that one to believe it, sure. But here's the real issue with all of this. There would be so much trust and so many what ifs thrown in that the developer, the publisher, the suits at the top wouldn't go, oh wow, the AI can do something and empower a developer to do the work of 20 developers. So as we see people get laid off in the gaming industry, seemingly on a whim at times, like you find out the next day that you're out. Are we sure that a lot of these suits at the top wouldn't go, oh wow, let's just lay off 80% of our staff because now we have AI that can do all the work? And that's the reason you see such backlash and this kind of reaction online to this, because there's the concern that it could replace the human element to game development. And then would you have a machine be able to actually replace sort of the artistic nature that we do rely on heavily for all of our games just about? That's not really a future I want to necessarily try to test here. So look, someone will. I'm sure a development studio will eventually try it. One person making an entire massive open world RPG or something with the help of AI, and then we'll really see what it can do there. But for now, this seems more like Microsoft working, as they say, to empower creators. And I think that is important right now for AI to at least provide, I'll say, assistance or just better tools in general to create games at a better pace. That's the biggest issue we're running into now. Development is just taking a long time and it's incredibly expensive. So if you can have AI and tools come in to expedite that a bit and make it easier on these creatives, on these developers, so they can make maybe bigger and better worlds, or just make games at a better cadence of even like 2 to 3 years, okay, then you're onto something there. But it's when you start replacing those people becomes a major problem. Next up, let's talk about a problem ongoing right now with limited run games and a couple of NES releases that they had. And I wanted to point this out just in case any of you have pre-ordered these games. Like you can see, for example, this is over on Time Extension. They say limited run accused of selling carts, which can damage your NES. With the big one that they're pointing out here being Rugrats. Now, this was noticed and passed along here at Time Extension by Jordi Hermoso, who, after getting in touch, explained the situation that there's a problem with a mismatch between the 3.3 volt carts and the 5 volt systems that they're being used on, like the original Nintendo, with 2 being pointed out with Rugrats and Puyo Pal. And after all of this was unfolding and sort of the discussion around this online, Limited Run did send out, it looks like an email to different people. John Riggs posted this up over on his Blue Sky account. They say they have identified that these titles were not manufactured by their regular partner who they have worked with across 30 plus titles and who they trust implicitly thanks to their impeccable manufacturing track record. The manufacturer who produced Rugrats and Pai-Pal has only worked on a very small handful of titles for limited run games right now. We are going through our back catalog of NES titles manufactured by the supplier and testing for possible issues. While we conduct further testing, our immediate pledge is to rectify the potential issue with Rugrats and Pai-Pal and ensure that this will not happen again. So they're going to go through and fill any of the back orders and stuff because there was like a pre-order. They're not technically for sale on their website anymore, but they have to then go through and replace them with a manufacturer that they have more confidence in. So it's really, you're just looking at a massive recall on these carts. So they're working to fix it, but it is concerning because it seemed like limited run just going forward with it, no problem, and it really took someone actually noticing it, bringing it up, calling it out for limited runs to be like, oh, yeah, we should have noticed that. Okay, we'll go ahead and replace it now. So, yeah, that's, might want to get that one worked out going forward and stick with the manufacturer that you trust. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Sony and Japan Studios, who we know was shut down years ago by Sony, and they were sort of, the remnants of it sort of reorganized in the team of Sobi, which, hey, to their credit, created Astro Bot, which won Game of the Year at the Game Awards, won Game of the Year at DICE, and many others. So in that regard, okay, that's worked out there. But Japan Studio had some very, very interesting games come out, very creative games. Unfortunately, games that didn't sell the best, and I think most of us look back and understand why. That maybe it didn't work out from the business sense, but the creative side is just, it was incredible there. Some of the stuff they came up with. Well, we do have Shuhei Yoshida, who was on Last Stand Media Sacred Symbols Plus, talking about all things Sony from his 30 plus years at the company. And he did touch on the closure of Japan Studio and kind of what happened there. We can see this post up. This transcribed by VGC says, other than Gran Turismo, we had many great products, but didn't really have many AAA level successful products. That became more and more important as the big games became bigger, the indies filled the gap, and the AA market seems to have disappeared. Most of the IPs that Japan Studio had were in that smaller AA sized group, and the market became really difficult for these kinds of games. For example, after Gravity Rush 2, their director tried to come up with a new concept, but we were not able to greenlight any of his new concepts, even though they were really interesting. And I mean, from the business side, I'm sure Sony was looking at it going, hey, that is a very interesting idea. But it's not really going to make much money. In fact, it'll probably lose a lot of money just based on the sales. I mean, they say Gravity Rush 2. Like, you just look at any of the games, for the most part, that they had released towards the end of the studio's existence, and they just weren't selling. And that clearly was the issue. So when they're pitching different game ideas that are a bit out there, would be real, I'm sure look awesome, like in motion. It'd be super artistic, really, really cool. Definitely things we haven't experienced before. Limited audience there, rising budgets. Once you can't really greenlight anything from the studio, it's like, what are we doing here? And unfortunately, that was sort of the way of Japan Studio. And again, they did end up becoming kind of Team Asobi and then creating Astro Bot. So they're kind of on the up and up now. But with that, I think the director then went off and made Slitterhead, which I don't really know how that one sold. So unfortunately, it was business. That's kind of how Shuhei Yoshida is presenting it here. I do think the AA market, though, while he's saying it doesn't really exist much anymore, and maybe it's Sony it kind of doesn't. I mean, it kind of does Nintendo. Nintendo does a lot of these smaller games that may not sell 10 million copies, but if they can get 1 or 2 million out of it, they're happy. I mean, look at Metroid. That's never been an incredibly well-selling franchise compared to what they'll do with, oh, here's a Mario Party game, and it's, oh yeah, that sold 20 million copies, no problem. It's not doing that. But they also have more control around their budgets, it seems, and they're fine with 2 to 3 million for some of these games selling, and that's good. For Nintendo, they have that AA structure in place. So I feel like if Sony wanted to, they could have kept going with it, but clearly their focus was on the big blockbuster AAA games with the PlayStation Studios logo front and center, and that's just kind of how they've been rolling along since. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, will Metroid Prime 4 Beyond release before the Switch 2? 83% say no. Look at that. 17% say yes. So I guess I still think Metroid Prime 4 Beyond would make a lot of sense to show off at the Switch 2 showcase April 2nd. I think most people agree with that. So if you show it off there, it's probably releasing the same day as the Switch 2 or even afterwards. So yeah, in that case, no, it wouldn't release before. But there is always a chance that the Switch 2 comes out in June and Metroid Prime 4 comes out, we'll say, in May. And it just gets in there. But honestly, if it's that close together, make it cross-gen, release it on the Switch 2 day one along with the Switch, like Breath of the Wild, and let Retro Studios go crazy with the Switch 2 hardware, because if there's something we know about Retro Studios, even just look at Metroid Prime Remastered, they know what they're doing with lesser powered hardware, or like weaker hardware, less capable hardware. So give them the Switch 2, where you have ray tracing and something that's significantly more powerful than the current Switch, and I think they can produce some very impressive looking visuals, and Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, to me, seems set up nicely to take advantage of it. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Shinjo, says, Tony Hawk basically confirmed that a new game was being developed months ago on last meals. Yeah, that's as I mentioned, the game industry is secretive to a fault. It's weird to, I'm sure, many people outside of the gaming industry, but we'll work with them on something like a Tony Hawk Pro Skater as an example, right? Where you have the pro skaters, the musical artists, Tony Hawk, they don't really get it. They want to talk about their new game. Remember on Instagram when it was the 25-year anniversary for the Tony Hawk franchise, the video game, he just posted on Instagram, hey, it's not over yet, guys, don't worry. And you know he wanted to post, hey, there's a new game coming next year, guys, a remaster, remake, or whatever that you guys have been clamoring for. 3 and 4 is on the way. But he can't do that because the secretive nature of gaming. But then you see him show up. It's like, yeah, we're working on that. Pro Skater, yeah, we're working on that. Musical artist, hey, I did a Tony Hawk. I submitted my track for Tony Hawk's new game next year. It's like, yeah, you're not supposed to say that. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed yesterday's Newswave, I'll leave it up here on a card. Or maybe you want to check out the latest episode of Game & Talk that aired last night. I'll leave it right below it. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.